The billionaire heirs laughed every time the old Filipino gardener walked past their mansion with dirt on his hands and sweat on his forehead. They mocked his worn-out boots, ignored his quiet greetings, and treated him as though he was invisible. For years, they believed wealth gave them the right to judge a man's worth. But the day their powerful father passed away, a single sentence hidden inside his final will shattered everything they believed. The man they had humiliated for years was carrying a truth so extraordinary that it would destroy their pride, rewrite their future, and reveal the true meaning of family, loyalty, and honor. Before we continue, if you believe kindness always returns, if you believe every person deserves respect no matter their job, please like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to Humanity Tales for more emotional stories that remind us what truly matters in life. The Del Rosario estate stretched across acres of perfectly maintained gardens overlooking the sea. Marble fountains sparkled beneath the morning sun, expensive cars lined the circular driveway, and every corner reflected generations of unimaginable wealth. Guests often admired the roses, orchids, towering palm trees, and carefully sculpted hedges before complimenting the family's luxurious lifestyle. Very few people ever asked who made those gardens beautiful every single day. Hidden behind the colorful flowers and trimmed hedges was a quiet Filipino gardener named Mateo Santos, a 65-year-old widower who had worked on the estate for more than 35 years. Every sunrise found him already watering flowers before anyone else woke. Every sunset ended with him checking every tree one last time before heading to his tiny staff cottage. Mateo had lived a life filled with sacrifice. Long before joining the Del Rosario family, he had spent years supporting his wife and young daughter with whatever honest work he could find. After losing his wife to illness decades earlier and later losing contact with his daughter following difficult family circumstances, gardening became more than a profession. It became his way of healing. Every flower he planted reminded him that broken things could bloom again with enough patience and care. Every tree he nurtured represented hope that even after harsh seasons, life always found a way forward. The billionaire patriarch, Eduardo del Rosario, had always noticed Mateo's quiet dedication. While the rest of the household barely acknowledged him, Eduardo greeted him every morning with genuine respect. He often walked through the gardens before important business meetings, listening as Mateo spoke about soil, seasons, and the importance of protecting young plants from storms before worrying about making them grow faster. Eduardo found wisdom in those simple observations. Although one built billion-dollar companies while the other planted flowers, both understood that lasting success required patience, discipline, and integrity. Eduardo's 3 adult children saw things very differently. Raised with unlimited privilege, they believed success was measured by expensive watches, luxury vacations, and business headlines. To them, the gardener was simply another employee whose existence barely deserved recognition. They complained whenever they saw dirt near their imported sports cars. They criticized the smell of fertilizer drifting across the lawn. Sometimes they laughed when Mateo carefully collected fallen leaves by hand instead of using expensive machines. They never considered that the old man preferred doing things carefully because every plant mattered to him. As years passed, the heirs became increasingly focused on competing for control of their father's business empire. Every family dinner quietly turned into a contest over profits, investments, and inheritance. They assumed the company's billions would naturally become theirs one day. None of them imagined that their father's greatest concern had never been money. Eduardo worried that despite all their education and privilege, his children had never learned compassion. He feared they admired success without understanding sacrifice. Watching the way they treated Mateo silently confirmed his greatest disappointment. One rainy afternoon, while everyone rushed indoors to escape the storm, Eduardo noticed Mateo covering dozens of fragile young plants with protective sheets despite soaking himself completely. When Eduardo asked why he had not gone inside first, Mateo simply continued securing the plants. He believed those small lives depended entirely on someone protecting them during difficult weather. Eduardo stood silently under an umbrella, realizing the gardener had unknowingly described true leadership better than many executives ever could. Months later, Eduardo's health began failing. Business meetings became shorter, family gatherings became less frequent, and the mansion slowly transformed into a place filled with quiet concern instead of celebration. Doctors came and went while the heirs privately discussed future ownership of the company. Mateo continued caring for the gardens exactly as always, refusing to let grief distract him from responsibilities he considered sacred. He often placed fresh flowers beneath Eduardo's bedroom window because he knew their fragrance brought comfort during painful days. When Eduardo finally passed away, newspapers covered the death of one of the country's most respected billionaires. Political leaders attended the funeral. Business executives praised his achievements. Cameras followed the grieving heirs dressed in elegant black suits. Hidden among the employees stood Mateo, holding a single white lily from the garden he had planted decades earlier. Tears quietly rolled down his weathered face because he had not merely lost an employer. He had lost the one man who always remembered his birthday, asked about his health, and thanked him for making the estate feel alive. Days later, family members gathered inside the Grand Library as attorneys prepared to read Eduardo's final will. The heirs expected straightforward instructions dividing ownership of companies, properties, investments, and luxury assets. Their confidence remained unshaken. The gardener was outside trimming hedges, completely unaware that his name appeared repeatedly throughout the carefully written document. The reading began normally with charitable donations, executive appointments, and financial distributions. Then everything changed. Eduardo had left the family mansion and corporate control to his children exactly as expected. However, attached to that inheritance was one remarkable condition. None of them would receive permanent ownership until they successfully completed one full year managing the estate under the guidance and supervision of Mateo Santos, the gardener they had ridiculed for years. If they refused, significant portions of the inheritance would instead fund educational scholarships, hospitals, and environmental foundations. Silence filled the room. The heirs stared at one another in disbelief. They could not understand why their father would trust a gardener with such authority over billion-dollar successors. Confusion soon turned into anger. Pride refused to accept that the elderly man they had ignored now held influence over their future. Yet the legal documents were clear. Eduardo had anticipated their reaction. Included with the will was a handwritten letter explaining his decision. He wrote that businesses could always recover from financial losses, but families destroyed by arrogance rarely recovered at all. He explained that Mateo had demonstrated loyalty for 35 years without demanding recognition. While executives came and went chasing higher salaries, the gardener remained through every economic crisis, every family celebration, every tragedy, and every success. Eduardo believed his children knew how to manage money but not people. Before inheriting wealth, they first needed to inherit character. Reluctantly, the heirs accepted the arrangement. The following year transformed them in ways they never expected. Mateo never humiliated them in return. He never reminded them of their cruel behavior. Instead, he quietly assigned responsibilities that seemed surprisingly ordinary. They planted flowers by hand, repaired broken fences, cleaned neglected corners of the property, met maintenance workers by name, prepared meals for elderly employees during holidays, and visited scholarship students funded by the family's foundation. They learned that every successful estate depended on countless hard-working individuals whose names rarely appeared in magazines. The oldest son struggled most. Accustomed to giving orders, he found it difficult taking instructions from someone he had once considered beneath him. Yet week after week, he watched Mateo treat every worker with equal dignity. Whether speaking to drivers, cleaners, chefs, or security guards, the gardener's respect never changed. Slowly, the son realized true authority did not require raising one's voice. Respect earned naturally lasted far longer than fear demanded. The middle child discovered records showing that Mateo had quietly donated portions of his modest salary for years to help educate children in his hometown. He had never told anyone because kindness performed for attention lost much of its meaning. That discovery deeply embarrassed someone who had spent millions on luxury items while believing generosity required public recognition. The youngest daughter uncovered another truth while organizing old family archives. Decades earlier, during a devastating financial crisis that threatened Eduardo's first company, Mateo had secretly mortgaged the small piece of land inherited from his parents to help employees receive overdue salaries. Eduardo had eventually repaid every cent and offered much greater rewards, but Mateo accepted only enough to reclaim his family land. His loyalty had helped save the company long before it became a billion-dollar empire. As months passed, the mansion itself seemed to change. Laughter returned, not because of expensive parties but because family members finally shared meaningful moments with employees they had never truly known. Birthdays were celebrated together. Staff dining areas improved. Scholarships expanded. Gardens flourished more beautifully than ever because everyone cared for them together instead of leaving the work to one invisible man. Near the end of the required year, Mateo's health suddenly declined. Years of physical labor had quietly taken their toll. The heirs rushed him to the hospital, sitting anxiously beside his bed. For the first time, they feared losing someone whose value they had only recently begun to understand. Looking at the worried faces surrounding him, Mateo realized Eduardo's final wish had already come true. Compassion had finally taken root where arrogance once grew. When the year officially ended, the attorneys returned to complete the inheritance process. This time, no one argued. No one questioned their father's decision. Instead, before signing a single document, all three heirs publicly thanked Mateo for teaching lessons no business school ever could. They announced that he would remain honorary caretaker of the estate for life, with every expense covered and every comfort provided. Even more importantly, they established the Mateo Santos Foundation, supporting gardeners, farmers, maintenance workers, and scholarships for hardworking families across the country. The gardens became more than beautiful landscapes. They became living reminders that greatness often grows quietly beneath the surface, unnoticed by those too distracted by appearances. Visitors continued admiring the flowers, but now they also learned the story of the humble gardener whose character transformed an entire family. If this story has touched your heart so far, please write in the comments. Respect has no job title. We'd love to know where you're watching from and what lesson this story reminded you of. Years later, children played beneath the same trees Mateo had planted decades earlier. The billionaire heirs walked through the gardens without expensive suits, happily helping employees prepare new flower beds during community events. Visitors who knew the family's past could hardly believe the transformation. Wealth had remained, but pride had disappeared. The greatest inheritance Eduardo left behind had never been measured in billions. It was measured in humility, gratitude, forgiveness, and the courage to recognize the dignity of every human being. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you to treat every person with kindness, please like this video, leave a heartfelt comment, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to Humanity Tales. Your support helps these meaningful stories reach more people who need hope, compassion, and a reminder that the smallest acts of respect can change lives forever. Because sometimes, the richest legacy isn't money at all, it is the goodness we leave growing in the hearts of others.